Please welcome back Dr. Art Laffer. Donald Rumsfeld just starts out, describing the situation there, economic times that were, headwinds. Does that relate to today and sort of where?
Exactly. I mean, I've been to this barbecue before. The first time I was at this barbecue, I didn't know it was a barbecue, but it smelled damn good. This time I know exactly what it is. We are reliving the 1970s today. Back then it was Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, which is the largest assemblage of bipartisan ignorance probably ever put on planet Earth. I call them the Four Stooges. And as you look at it right now, we're going through the exact same period, and we are right in 1980 today. The political winds are right with us. We've got the House, legislatures, we've got the governors, we've got the Senate, we've got the House, largest majority in the House since 1928 of pro-growth, and all we need now is a good president. And once we have that, this economy is going to take off like you've never seen.
Well, it's exciting because you remember the early days, even the ascension of Ronald Reagan. We're here in Southern California where a lot of those social circles that some have passed, some are still here. Talk a little bit about, what created Ronnie back in the 60s.
Ronnie, I love it. The reason I was close to Reagan was he called a whole meeting of economists. He had all of us standing up on a platform like this, hundreds and hundreds of economists standing up there, and he looked at me and he said, "I'll take the little short fat one over there." By the way, that's not true. That's not what happened. My godfather happened to be his best friend, Justin Dart was, and it's always nice having privilege. And I've been working with the governor then, and then President Reagan all the way from the late 60s on. And you should have seen how he transferred and transformed.
He was not the man we think of today, day one.
Well, he was the man we think of, but he wasn't the same person. I mean, when he was governor of California, he raised the personal income tax rate from 9.3% to 11.2%. He raised the capital gains tax rate. His own legislation, not Democrats pushing him in the corner or something. He did it. He raised the corporate tax from 9 to 11. He put in the first criminal furlough program in U.S. history. He was a big social spender at the time. He chaired the Equal Rights Amendment, if any of you remember those days. Ronald Reagan also, through his own legislation, eliminated all of the anti-abortion statutes in the state of California. He was the pro-choice governor. Who would believe that that man could become the greatest president ever? And he did. And the way he did it was he learned, he changed, he modified. I remember once teasing him a little bit. I said, sir, when you were governor, you did. Art, stop right there. I know I was a terrible governor. And I said, sir, I'm not saying that. He said, no, but I was. But at least I'm better than those other damn governors. At least when I made a mistake, I changed my policies. And the truth is that Reagan evolved into being one of the greatest people in U.S. His genius, his wonderfulness was the way he evolved, he changed, he learned by mistakes. If any of you ever get a chance, go to Marty Anderson, who's passed away, but look at his book, Reagan in His Own Hand. It is an astounding book of a brilliant man who kept written records every day. And the background at that time of our group, we've talked about this, but the little social group of Bel Air and up in Los Angeles and all of us. And
a lot of decorated characters there.
Well, they were, Justin Dart, my godfather, Holmes Tuttle, Jack Rather, Bill French Smith, Bill Wilson, Cummins, this was our little clique. I'll tell one story and then I'll let you. The story, you remember Reagan when he did the Goldwater speech, the 64 one? The story I was told as to how this happened is after he did that speech, he became really famous in all circles and everyone wanted him to run for governor. And Just Dart went and talked to him and said, Ron, you got to run for governor. You're popular. This guy, Edmund G. Pat Brown, Jerry Brown's father, was governor, was going to run for a third term. He said, you got to run. You got to get him out of here. We need a big change here in California. And Reagan said, Just, I just don't want to do that. I want to run around kissing babies and going to, all these little Republican get-togethers and beg for money from everyone. I just don't want to do that. I'm just not going to do it. So they talked for a while, and they came the sort of an estimate of what they needed. It was about $700,000 to run for governor.
1964?
That was 1966.
66.
1966.
$700,000 to be governor.
Well, that's what they figured it would take to run for governor, and they left, and next week they had lunch again together. Justin and Just brought a little envelope and handed it to his friend Ron Reagan. And he said, "Open it, Ronnie." And he opened it up, and there were 7 checks for $100,000 each. And he said, "Now run." And, you know, the earth changed because of that. I mean, really changed. It was a fundamental change in the planet. And the genius of Ronald Reagan was not that he was born in a manger. The genius of Ronald Reagan, he learned from his actions, from observing and going on.
And how did that transform for him personally from 66 beyond, you know, up until the point where we think of him today from 80 on?
Well, as governor, as you know, I mean, I mentioned what he did with taxes and all that, and the performance of California, as you might guess, wasn't exceptional. He was an exceptional person. I mean, everyone recognized the person, Ronald Reagan. You know, Jerry Brown came in 1974. Jerry Brown was a very good governor, by the way. We got Prop 13, we got rid of the estate tax, we indexed the personal income tax, we got the GAN spending limits. We had a rocket ship of California when California was pro-growth, free market, democratic. And then you see Reagan coming in, 78, he saw Prop 13.
And there's probably folks out there that don't recall what Prop 13 was about.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And the 11-year ascension before Prop 13 got passed, too, here in California. That was a major shift, right?
Well, we passed Prop 13 in June of 1978. And what it did was it set the limit of property taxes to be no more than 1% of the market value of a home, period. It had been about 2.7% of market value. So when that passed in 1978, they cut the taxes there by about 60% property taxes. Now, property taxes at that time funded cities, counties, and local districts. It wasn't a state revenue source. It was just cities, counties, local districts, schools especially. So it was a massive hit on that one area. I got a call that night from Jerry Brown, as you saw the morning, if any of you saw it with Jerry. I did his flat tax when he ran for president. Jerry called me, asked me to come up. I came up that next morning, sat with the cabinet for 3 days, and Jerry Brown put subventions in of $5 billion to offset the damage done to cities, counties, and local districts. And within a year and a half, 2 years, the revenues had come back fully in. The economy of California, I think, grew by a San Francisco a year. At the end of 10 years, I think we grew by more than the state of Massachusetts. I mean, we were the rocket ship of the United States because of free market, pro-growth economics, and all the tax cuts I told you, I mean, all that. And then, of course, at the end of the 80s, we got Prop 98, then we got Prop 111, which is the gas tax and all that, and we started the downward spiral again.
And of course, you followed Reagan last year. I think we were in Dallas, where there were these moments, too, from 76 to 80. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, Reagan changed very much. I mean, you know, I used to tease him, and I'll tell you, I used to tease him. I said, you know, sir, it's my professional judgment that you, sir, are a certifiable genius. I said, but you know, sir, some of my colleagues at the university don't really concur in my assessment of your intellectual acumen. In fact, sir, some of my colleagues at the university don't think you're very bright at all. But the one thing my colleagues and I do agree upon is your uncanny ability to select your 4 predecessors. Anyone following in the heels of Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter just can't look bad. I mean, just can't. And you know, I can tell you from personal experience, and really this is true, if Reagan had been elected in 1976, you would not have seen the Ronald Reagan that you know and love. It would have been a different person. In all truth, it took Jimmy Carter to create Ronald Reagan. And in the same sense that it took Jimmy Carter to create Ronald Reagan, you can't believe the great president who is going to follow Barack Obama.
So let's talk a little bit about what that means, the jobless recovery here. Is this, you've looked backwards. I know you're working with the committee to unleash economic prosperity. interviewing all the presidential hopefuls as you can in dinners and social events. And of course, this is fairly unique that we've had this bottom trough that we normally spring out of this. In fact, I think Larry Kudlow likes to point out that prior to 2000, for the century before, America was regularly growing at 3.5%. So are we really in a unique place, economically speaking?
Yeah, this is the single worst recovery in U.S. history. It is the worst. It's taken a long, long time. It's very similar, if you would look at it, to the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, they raised the highest personal income tax rate from 25% to 83%. I mean, it's amazing. I've never heard of an economy being taxed into prosperity. I missed that in Econ 1. Krugman got it in Econ 1, by the way. Just teasing. Just teasing. It's the worst recovery. Whether you look at employment. Employment as a share of adult population today is about 59.3%. When Clinton left office, it was 64.7%. During Reagan, we increased employment as a share of population by a huge amount during that. With tax cuts, pro-growth policies, we are in exactly the same situation we were in 1980. And it's just very exciting seeing that. Obama is as bad as Jimmy Carter, and I don't mean that as a personal thing. He's just really bad policies. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not liberal, it's not conservative, it's not left wing, it's not right wing. It's economics. And if I can just do one or two things, I mean, it's math, people. I mean, you can get people like John F. Kennedy, who is as good as any president ever.
Cut taxes.
Cut taxes, pro-growth, strong dollar, back the dollar with gold. I mean, everything you're supposed to do. You can get Ronald Reagan, same set of policies as Jack Kennedy. Bill Clinton, who I thought was a good president. I thought he was a disgusting person, but a great president. Well, I voted for him twice, but I held my nose when I did it. But you get that. It's the economics. And let me just do redistribution for you. All the welfare payments and all that stuff. The theorem is that whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce income. You always reduce income when you redistribute income, period. Let me show you the model clearly. And when you redistribute income more, your drop in total income will be greater. And if you do total redistribution, you will have zero income. Let me illustrate it. Whenever you redistribute income, you take from someone who has a little bit more, and you give to someone who has less. Okay, you all with me on that? You take from someone who has more, you give it to someone who has less. By taking it from someone who has more, you provide disincentives for them working and producing, and they will produce less. By giving it to someone who has less, these people all of a sudden find that they have an alternative source of income other than working, and they too will produce less. Whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce total income. It's math, it's not religion, it's not anything else, it's math. And as you can see, if you ever did total redistribution of income, you'll end up with zero income. I mean, if you want total redistribution of income, what you do is everyone who makes above the average income, you tax them 100% of the excess. And anyone who makes below the average income, you subsidize them up to the average income. And in that way, you can ensure that everyone will end up with the same. You all follow me? If you actually did that, if you actually taxed everyone who made above the average income 100% of the excess, and actually subsidized people below the average income up to the average income, I will stipulate today, counselor, everyone will be equal and total income will be zero. There will be no income. You got to understand the theorems here. People don't work to pay taxes. People work to get what they can after tax. It's that very personal, very private incentive that motivates people to go get education, to switch from one job to another, to get off their duff and go to work. I mean, this is economics, and it's not sociology, it's not anthropology, it's not religion, it's math.
Very true. And yet, the last few years, the states out here, leaders out here, places like North Carolina, Kansas, Ohio, and beyond, have been doing what they can in the state and federal tax code to lower the price of work, to see more work.
Yep.
And they're doing that at a time when there are rising federal taxes. So is that part of the reason we're not seeing the immediate response in some cases?
Well, I don't think so in the States. I mean, it's already the relative. I mean, everyone in America faces the federal taxes, federal bad monetary policy, regulatory. All of that's federal. Now, there may be some distributional effects here. But I mean, if you know in our book, I mean, when we look at the 0 income tax states and the 9 highest income tax states, I mean, the 9 earned income tax states beat the living bejabers out of the 9 highest income tax rates, and that's over a decade period to get those sort of bobbles and wiggles out. If you look at it over the last 50 years, or you look at the 0 earned income tax states as you go back in time, there are obviously a lot more states had no income tax. If you look at every single year over the last 50 years, the 0 income tax states have outperformed the highest income tax rate states of the same number, every single year out of 50 years. What we did in our first chapter, if you remember, is the fall from grace. We looked at the 11 states in the last 60 years that have introduced an income tax, starting with West Virginia in 1961, ending with Connecticut, with Lowell Weicker, I mean, in 1991. If you look at it, every single one of those 11 states, and that's Maine, it's Rhode Island, it's New Jersey, it's Ohio, it's Pennsylvania, it's Indiana, it's Illinois, it's Nebraska, it's all of these states, Michigan. I mean, if you look at all of them, every single one of those states declined as a share of the U.S. economy. Every single one of them, not one exception. We then looked at the public services. I mean, why did they put in the income tax if not to get better public services? I mean, that's the whole argument. So we looked at the public services. How many full-time equivalent employees? We looked at inputs. We looked at output measures. We looked at NAEP scores for schools and all that. Of the 11 states that introduced the income tax, 11 outperformed the country by a little bitty bit, and 8 underperformed. And the 8 that underperformed, 5 of those way underperformed. I mean, we talked about California earlier, but I mean, California has the best, highest paid teachers and the worst education in the world. It's not luck that happens.
Or rocket surgery, as you would
quote
Larry Gatlin.
Don't you love Larry Gatlin and Steve Moore? I mean, Steve Moore, it's a work-free drug area. How does he think of things like that? It's a mind that's amazing.
So you're talking to a lot of these hopefuls, and we're all waiting for a Superman or Superwoman to emerge as the next president. How do you know they get it? You've talked about the North Star this morning, kind of pointing to principle. There are a lot of people out here that will be tested on those principles through their own leadership or evaluating the leadership of these would-be candidates, especially in the early battleground states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Florida, Nevada. How do you look at it? How do you score them when you're sitting down with them?
Well, let me just say that I know all the candidates, some of them really, really well. The 2 I do not know is I don't know Santorum. I really don't know him at all. I've never spent any time, nor do I know Donald Trump. I don't know Donald Trump. But I know the others. Rick Perry I've worked with forever. I mean, Scott Walker, when he was county executive, I knew him real well.
A dozen governors alleged.
Oh, yeah, all of these guys. I mean, I've spent a lot of time with. The neat thing is they have a common characteristic with Reagan. They're trying to find the right set of policies. And when you look at this competition going on, these guys are trying to figure out what I need to do to get the money, the funding, to get the votes, to do all that. And it's this process of competition that really will create the best candidate imaginable. And if you watch it, I mean, Rand Paul had a proposal out there that would get rid of the payroll tax up to $20,000 a year income. It's a low-wage working man's tax cut. It's the silliest idea I'd ever heard. It was just dumb. And then what happened is when he finally came out with it, that was gone. He tested it out on a lot of people. He changed. That's what he's supposed to do. I'm waiting for Rubio to change on the child tax credit. There's nothing wrong with helping people out who have children, but do it with a check. Don't do it within the tax codes. Do it and write a check to them and pay. A lot of people with children don't file tax returns. You're not going to help them. I mean, what you want to do is really focus. And that's what this whole process is going on. And what you're watching is these candidates are moving and breathing. Do not judge the candidate by what he or she says today. Judge them by what they're going to say the day of the primary so we get the right message across. And that's exactly what's happening.
How about the others in that equation? Governor Walker was here recently. Obviously, from the speech, it looked like he was strengthening foreign policy, becoming more comfortable in his shoes.
Yep.
Other governors, we've looked at net private jobs created by all these that have governor jobs records. Jeb Bush created 400 jobs a day, net private jobs during that tenure.
Yep, sure
different time, different place. What else should we be asking these candidates as we,
Well, that's what we should be asking. And I know all these. Jeb, I've known forever. I was a pallbearer at Jorge Mas Canosa's funeral with him. I've known him, a great governor of Florida, a great person. My joke to him was, you're the best Bush. But that's not a very high bar. And his response to me was, you watch yourself, Laffer. I come from a stand-your-ground state. So, but if you look at this, Chris Christie's as good as they get. Rick Perry, there's no one better governor than Rick Perry. I mean, it's terrific. You look at all of these. Huckabee. I mean, Huckabee's a pretty impressive guy if you ever sit down with him. Scott Walker's amazing. John Kasich. I mean, how do you get better? John Kasich won Mahoning County and Cuyahoga County in Ohio. There's not been a Republican to win that in 400,000 years. I mean, the Mahoning, when I was born in Youngstown, Ohio, and that's Mahoning County, and the story was when I was a kid that the mayor of Mahoning County said the Mahoning River, mayor of Youngstown said, the Mahoning River's for jobs, not for fishes. Can you imagine someone saying that today? And then he said he didn't trust air he couldn't see. You know,
different tone.
In Youngstown at that time, every breath of air was 3 calories. You know, it's a different time, a different world. These candidates, all of your candidates, by the way, I'm really going to tell you, are fantastic candidates. Each and every one, with the 2 exceptions, and I don't know if they aren't great. I mean, I just don't know them. But each and every one of these candidates has the ability, the competence, and the wherewithal to be a good president. They're now in the competition of their life with the other candidates, trying to figure out which one can design the best plan to really go. And I am so excited because this is what we need to really get a good race and to bring prosperity back to America.
Art Laffer, thank you very much. Our time has drawn near.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Real pleasure.